Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us for Advocate for Kids, Become a CASA Volunteer. I'm Kelly Caseman, the Executive Director of Think Kids, and we're going to spend the next hour talking with a screen full of good people who work and volunteer for West Virginia CASA. We'll have them introduce themselves in just a minute. We'll keep an eye on the YouTube comments section, and we will be responding to your questions and comments 3 times during the conversation. So if you have anything to ask or share, be sure to type them in. Let's start with introductions and what your roles with CASA are, and we'll begin with Shana.
All right, thanks, Kelly. Hey, I'm Shanna Gray. I'm the State Executive Director for West Virginia CASA. Super honored to share the screen with you today, Kelly, and your Think Kids team. Also, super excited for you all that are listening here at home or work to have the opportunity to meet these incredible CASA volunteers. They're truly the backbone of our operations, advocating for kids. So this past year, our CASA community volunteers, they advocated for over 1,800 children and youth in West Virginia. And another 3,000 kids received some kind of additional services or resources from these CASA programs. So super pleased to let them introduce themselves, and I'll pass the baton on. I think, Pat, maybe you're next up.
Okay, I'm Pat Machete. I'm a licensed social worker, but had to retire as a result of disability. I've been with CASA-EP for over 2 years. I have 10 kids that I've worked with in those 2 years. Plus, I help to facilitate our Fostering Futures program and our CASA Youth Leadership Summit every year.
Great, thanks. Next up is Patty.
Hello, I'm Patty Burdette, and I am from Greenbrier County. I became a CASA after I retired as a career educator. I was the Social Services and Attendance Director for Greenbrier County Schools. And the CASA kids were always on my heart as a former principal. I've been with CASA now for 5 years because I've been retired for 5 years.
Thanks, Patty. Next up is Dave.
Hi, I'm Dave Fritsch from Mineral County CASA. As we've learned, several others folks here are also retired educators, as I am. I'd been a principal and finished up in the central office, and got to work with a lady there that had a lot of foster children all the time. So at my last principals meeting, I heard about CASA, and 12 years ago, after I retired, after about a year, I joined the Mineral County CASA, and I've been doing it ever since. I can't really keep track of the number of kids. It's been a lot over the years.
Thanks, Dave. Alison.
I'm Alison Gerlock. I am the volunteer supervisor in Kanawha County. I'm with Western Regional CASA. We do cover locally 10 counties with Western Regional CASA. We cover Cabell, Putnam, Kanawha, Mason, Jackson, Roane, Calhoun, Wayne, Lincoln, and Boone counties. I think I got them all. It's always a struggle to make sure I don't forget any, but I thankfully only have to worry about Kanawha. We have other volunteer supervisors to handle some of those other counties. And I will say, it's the greatest job in the world. Who gets to work with such wonderful volunteers who have such a heart for helping kids? I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Great, thank you, Alison. Joanne. Joanne, I'm sorry, you're on mute.
Okay, somebody had to be first to do that, so I took that honor away from the rest of you. Sorry. I'm Joanne Gregory.
Oh, shoot. Joanne, you're on mute again. I'm not sure what happened.
Okay, move that out of the way. I really didn't want to do that twice. I don't know what you got and what you didn't get, so here I go one more time. I'm a retired teacher. I taught elementary and middle school. And when I retired, I not only wanted to be a new good grandma because my grandson was born 2 days after I retired, but I also wanted to continue supporting youth. When I taught, I finished as a librarian, and the children who needed to decompress and feel safe had an arrangement with me and the BD teacher. And I would sometimes turn around and they would be sitting in the library. And then I put another group of 3 young men to work, and they redid our wooden bookshelves, and they were beautiful. This is my 3rd year with CASA, and I find that this helps me to continue being a lifelong learner, which is really important to me. And as I work with clients and families and CPS and my CASA supervisor, I learn a lot regularly. My clients have been tweeners. They're 12 going on 13, but they think they're 21.
Many do, don't they? Thank you, Joanne. And the last, but certainly not least, is Sharon.
Hi there, Sharon Iskra. I guess am the newbie compared to the other veterans on the Zoom today. I've been a CASA for about 1.5 years. I am, when I'm not doing CASA, I'm a full-time litigator at Bailey Glasser, and I lead the institutional abuse and neglect practice, which unfortunately means I represent a lot of children every day in my practice. So CASA is a natural offshoot for me. I have found it very fulfilling. Haven't handled as many as some on this call, but looking forward to many more years with it, and have just been impressed with the impact I've been able to make.
Thanks, Sharon. Thank you all for joining us. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So let's begin with what CASA is and your respective roles around the mission. So what's the role that CASA plays in the bigger systems?
Yeah, I'll start out, Kelly. So kind of talking about the child welfare system, and CASA, you all on the call probably are familiar. It stands for Court Appointed Special Advocates. And our mission is to engage and empower enough community volunteers to advocate for every child who's experienced abuse or neglect. So when we're talking about child welfare, we think about children who are involved in child protection cases. And we're really seeing a national movement kind of catch up to the research. Like, there's a broader recognition and a better understanding that serving children, it just cannot exclusively be isolated from serving families, right? So to do that, I think we have to seek out and really include the natural and the community supports who can wrap around or like engulf the child, their family, their families, whatever modifier you want to put in front of family with that. So CASA's work, we've always really been driven by our guiding principle that children grow and develop best when they're with their families of origin. So through our advocacy for children in West Virginia's foster care system, we really aim to reinforce that family by strengthening the families. You know, we can really begin the process of healing communities and ultimately reducing that surge of those who are involved in the child welfare system. I think that CASA, you know, in West Virginia, as an established community organization, we really have a significant role in shaping the child welfare system here as we're moving to this more holistic or well-rounded approach. And I think, Alison, maybe you want to speak to kind of how we work with the judicial systems?
Sure. We do work within the judicial system. Over 30 years ago, the powers that be, I would say, the legislature, the West Virginia Supreme Court, decided that CASA would be a benefit for the judicial system. So CASA, when we talk about being special advocates, part of what that means is we are special because we are allowed in the court system. It is allowed judicially into the court system by the rules of procedure for abuse and neglect cases. And we are appointed to cases by the actual judges on those cases. So the children that we serve have been removed from their families of origin due to some sort of abuse and neglect. They have entered into the foster care system in general and have a court case and a judge and all those other things that can be very scary for children. So what we do within the court system is, obviously our volunteers have such a wonderful way of supporting and getting to know these children and helping these children. And then we take that in the role of the court system, one more step in that advocacy with the role of reporting to the judge. We do court reports, which give a lot of information about the children, a lot of personal information in the sense of it paints a real picture of who these children are for a judge who may or may not ever get the chance to meet the child that they're making decisions about. And we're able to give a voice to these children in court, make sure that they are not forgotten in the shuffle, not only is just this sort of thing, but is a child and is a person and as someone who has a voice and has an opinion and has feelings and thoughts about all of this. We make sure all of that ends up in the court system. Our court reports make recommendations, and those recommendations can be about services that the child needs or that the parent may need to help with a safe reunification process. So it could be anything from some sort of substance use treatment, counseling, therapy, tutoring for the children. But because we do come at it from a volunteer and community perspective, we are also able to make sort of the creative recommendations that sometimes that's to help out with a child maybe being able to play a sport or join Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts or do something that just reminds them how to be a child, how to play. Maybe it's seeing somebody that they were friends with, but they've had to move schools and making sure that happens, or seeing a sibling. So we're able to make all of those recommendations. And we're also able to make recommendations ultimately of what's in that child's best interest. So we can take how well we know these children and make recommendations, hopefully for reunification. And if that's not possible, some other thing that the child would want or would be best for the child, such as an adoption or guardianship. So our judges take what we put in those court reports very, very seriously. I can tell you in the last week, I've had a judge basically quote our court reports in 2 separate hearings because they give great weight to what we say, because they know that our volunteers have put in the time to get to know these children. They know they have the heart for caring, and they know that they just really are looking out for these kids' best interests. And I think that all of our judges in the state view that as a just wonderful benefit.
Thanks, Allison. You know, I agree. I remember hearing last year. So we talked about this last year, and it was really one of our most popular streaming events that we had. And we talked, somebody shared a story and said, you know, the child was so happy to have somebody just there for them, which was, you know, really meaningful to hear. And last year we spoke a great deal about the opioid epidemic in West Virginia and how children have been impacted by that. Certainly we've seen an influx over the last few years of kids in the foster care and child welfare system due to it. Let's talk about the world that these kids find themselves in and how CASA helps.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, Kelly. Like the opioid epidemic, it's not new to West Virginia. A majority of the children who are served by CASA have been affected in some way by substance use disorder. What I think we're starting to see is a change in response, though. So firstly, there's a broader recognition that substance use disorder is, in fact, a mental health issue, right? So just that in and of itself. And then certainly that this mental health issue needs to be addressed. So we're seeing community members, professionals really recognize that these individuals who are suffering from substance use disorder or working to overcome it, really respecting their journey and managing the illness. And so by acknowledging that, we're starting to see somewhat a shift in reduction in the stigma that sometimes or has historically been associated with substance use disorder. And then in some areas, not all, but in some areas, we're starting to see more programs or initiatives being available that can help to provide support for children and families. But I think to speak more specifically in terms of how CASA is serving children who have been affected by the opioid epidemic, I know we have Patty here. Maybe Patty wants to take over the mic, and I'll put myself on mute. You want to talk to us about serving youth who've been affected by substance use disorder?
A recent case that I have is a middle school child. When I was reading the court reports on this and the petition, he has a psychological father. That was a term I'd never heard before. What's a psychological father? Background info: biological father is not in the picture since he was recently released from jail, so he's not in the picture. So there's no biological father. The child became part of the system when his mom's former boyfriend was arrested on drug charges. The mother is homeless. It's a former boyfriend. So the term psychological dad is because the child has been living with that adult for over 1.5 years without legal terms, without legal paperwork. So that's what a psychological father is. When I met with the child, he was most interested in his, he called him his stepdad. But his stepdad now has pending charges. So it's probably not going to happen that he's reunited with him. His mother and father are both homeless and are not in the picture. So that's definitely all drug related. And he's definitely a child who, through no fault of his own, is a part of the opioid epidemic. So, and he's a middle schooler. So, okay, that's just a case.
That's really helpful, Patty, because what I learned when we started talking about this issue of how kids are adversely affected by the drug crisis, you learn that there's kids living with such complexity and sometimes very transitional of going from person to person, which can really make it hard for them to form lasting bonds with the adults in their lives. So let's pan out a bit. Who are the children also served by CASA, and what does a day in the life of a CASA volunteer look like? And I think, Dave, you are up to answer this one.
I was going to mention about some of the younger children that I've worked with. Typically get involved after a preliminary hearing and the child's already been removed, maybe to a couple different places in an emergency. The child feels anxious and unmoored, and oftentimes those young children will approach me. Maybe they see me as a grandfather type and will be unnaturally familiar with me, wanting to sit on my lap, pat my hair or something like that, something that most children wouldn't do around me if when they first met me. And I will notice that several times as I visit with the child. And then when all of a sudden the child starts to feel safe, maybe all of a sudden they've got siblings in the house, or they've bonded with a foster adoptive parent, the child won't really care about me nearly as much. They'll still acknowledge me the way any young child might if I come into a home, but they don't desperately need my attention and an attachment to me. And at that point, that's when I start to feel, okay, this is working. You know, you see how the child relates to the parents. You see how the child relates to the family dog and the siblings that are tussling around. And you can just get a feel for, okay, this child feels safe and this child feels happy now.
Thank you, Dave. Joanne, you want to talk about you?
Yes. I find with the tweeners that they have faced personal turmoil and oftentimes great disappointments in their home lives. Oftentimes they don't fit in with their peers because their lives are so very different from their peers. Frequently, they've fallen behind academically due to high absentee rates, lack of support at home, and expending all the time and energy it takes them to cope with those issues at home. And sometimes survival means taking care of themselves and also taking care of younger siblings. A day in the life of CASA for me means visits to the foster home or the school, phone calls and text messages and emails with the client, the child, the foster parent, the school, CPS, the CASA supervisor. And I'm often jotting notes because I want to document everything I can so that when I do a court report, it's as accurate as it could be. And then other aspects of the CASA work that does not directly involve the children is to attend in services to broaden our knowledge base, read books for book studies, complete timesheets, work on the court reports. And those are the things that I find are most important in my work as a CASA. Thank you.
Thanks, Joanne. Next up is Pat.
Hi. So my passion is working with teenagers. And very often when it comes to foster care, people want babies. They don't want teens. And so I find those to be the most challenging cases, but also the most rewarding cases. And like I mentioned before, I'm part of Fostering Futures, which is a CASA program specifically trying to teach kids life skills, teenagers life skills, because when they turn 18, if they're not back with their family or in a permanent placement, they often become homeless. So in working with my kids and Fostering Futures and also my own cases, I'm not sure if you're aware, but 30% of kids in foster care identify as LGBTQ+. So 30% of foster kids and 1% of kids that identify as trans. Now in the child population that are not in foster care, only 11% of kids identify as LGBTQ. And so like right now I have a trans kid, I have a non-binary kid, I've got 2 kids that are bisexual and one that identifies as pansexual. So I want to highlight that we need to be able to meet these kids where they are, no matter how they identify, their orientation or their gender and how they express it. So what I'm really hoping will happen is that from conversations like this, that we will have more advocates that are allies or from that community. But overall, like just what Dave and Joanne were saying is that there is no typical day. We have one conversation and then from there we have to write contact notes. So we, may reach out to our volunteer supervisor to see, get some advice of where to go next. And, like today I've been in contact with my kid, with the guidance counselor, with her grandmother, with, the medical system, and trying to keep DHHR and her guardian ad litem aware of everything as they're transpiring. So it can be a lot of work, but ultimately so rewarding. I can't tell you as much more than that. They're amazing.
Thank you so much, Pat. Sharon, do you have a story to?
Yeah, I would just echo what Dave and Pat and Joanne have said. Not to belabor that, but just to bring out a thread that Joanne just mentioned, that Pat just mentioned. The way that children respond to you. That's where I see such great impact. Most of the children I have worked with have been younger, but when I introduce myself and I tell them, look, I am here for you. I'm not mom's attorney. I'm not dad's attorney. I'm not a CPS worker. I'm not a guardian ad litem. I'm someone here just for you. I'm going to be your voice. I want to know what you want. And just to see how that just affects them, to think that they get to say something. And here is somebody just dedicated to speaking for them. And I say, what do you want me to tell the judge? And I had a young one time. She says, how many of these cases do you have? I was like, I could tell the wheels were turning. A CPS worker, she's busy. Mom's attorney, dad's attorney, they're busy. They have so many of these cases. I said, I'm just for you. And the look on her face was she just started to glow. I'm your only one. I said, yes, so I love that this is small batch and that we really do reach children that way and empower them. That's what a day in a life looks like for me. Very rewarding.
Thank you, Sharon. I love these stories. Shayna, do you want to share a little bit more about the logistics, about services and resources?
Yeah, I think maybe it's just important to note that we don't do it alone. CASA is truly a community response. I often think about the timeless adage, it takes a village. And CASA and the volunteers, as you've heard them talking about different folks that they are talking with, is really working to engage that village. So not only are our community members actually on the ground doing the work of advocacy, but are also collaborating with other child serving organizations or family serving services. We're fortunate to work alongside with organizations like child advocacy centers and family resource networks, United Ways, Think Kids, agencies who are working to curb that rise in children needing foster care services.
Great, thank you. I'm going to take a little break and see what we have on the chat. And I just see a remark from Dara, who says, greeting folks, I came in a little late. So thanks for joining us, Dara. We'll jump right into the next question. So I'd love to hear some personal experiences. How did you get involved with CASA? You didn't just jump in, you don't immediately become a CASA volunteer. So what led you down this path? I think we're going to start with Pat.
So coming to CASA was relatively easy for me. I had been a social worker for over 25 years, specifically working with people who had been affected by trauma, mostly adolescents, but also small children. And when I became disabled, I got so focused on myself and my pain and my disability and trying to manage, it became a full-time job just to take care of my health. So when COVID hit, and keeping in mind that I've only been in West Virginia for 3 years now, COVID hit and I felt so powerless. And I saw how the numbers of reports around domestic violence and substance abuse and child abuse and neglect skyrocketed here in Berkeley County. And I felt like I had to do something. And I contacted a few organizations and CASA got back to me. And honestly, I feel like as a therapist, obviously I felt like I was doing good work, but this is even before therapy. We talk about how kids are resilient and how trauma affects them. But when it comes down to it, when this wound happens, we as CASA workers get to be there right on the front line, advocating for them, making sure that they get services. And I feel that the work that we do at CASA is so valuable. So that's really what brought me to CASA, is wanting to serve my community.
And I came to CASA through the previous job that I had. As I stated earlier, CASA was on my heart, those kids, as the attendance and social service director for our county. And so after I retired, I reached out to our local CASA organization, to the 11th Circuit Court, and asked about how to become a volunteer. And so I want to tell you, I had some excellent training, great support, and I just felt like my previous role would help with what it was with CASA, because it's all kind of the same. It's all advocating for kids. But I just want to say, you don't go in at it alone. You have a whole support team with you, and they won't. The ladies I work with, the folks I work with, won't let you go there alone if you're anxious at all. So the support is just wonderful.
Thanks. Dave?
Like in my work in Mineral County in schools, I've worked with a lot of staff and kids from Burlington United Methodist Family Services, and tremendously admired what they did over the years. And then I finished out my career in Hampshire County, and the last week of school, I was getting ready to retire, and I thought I might play hooky on the last principals meeting. I thought I'd never played hooky in my entire school career, even as a student. I thought, what could they do to me? But I went anyway, and there was a lady there that was doing a presentation about CASA in Hampshire County. And I was sitting there and I was kind of thinking, what do I do after I retire? I thought that might be the right thing. Well, a year later, my home county, Mineral County, started their CASA, and they had a billboard on my road. I mean, it's rare that I pay any attention to any billboards anywhere, but there was this billboard saying to call Jerry Mason. And I thought I'd call Mr. Mason. Well, it turned out to be Mrs. Mason, and got involved with it. And I've been doing that for, I think, 12 years since. And like many of the others here too, it's not something you do by yourself. I gave the story, I've been doing this long enough that I go all the way back to the time when bin Laden was killed. And SEAL Team 6 was a big issue in our culture. And I said, we're like SEAL Team 6 here in our CASA. We're not trying to win the whole war by ourselves. We are getting one case, one child, one family, and we're focusing on it. We've got all the time that we need because we're retired. We're naturally inquisitive and nosy people, and that helps. We've got all this technical support and intelligence and expertise around us, and that includes our CASA people and fellow advocates. It includes guardian ad litems. It includes prosecuting attorneys. Just an amazing level of staff development, honestly superior to what I was exposed to in education over the years. So we go in there with all this preparation, and then we stubbornly work to figure out what's going to be best for our kid. And a surprising number of times we're successful. It's amazing how often we're successful on our mission, on our particular kids. And so you end up feeling good. You end up feeling like your time's well spent. You're meeting some amazing people. You're meeting relatives that take a child into their lives when they're already scrambling by on money. You're meeting some amazing foster parents that, honestly, a whole lot of them, they should be polishing their halos a lot more than they do. Most of my experiences in CASA leave me feeling optimistic and better about what's happening in our country and what's happening in our lives here.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So one of the things we hear often at Think Kids is, this feeling of hopelessness. It's from folks in education, but also healthcare, different community services, and they want to do something to help, but they feel as if, there's no way to do, it's a lost cause. And you all are really making a compelling case to say it's not a lost cause. You really can dig in your little circle, of the state and make a real change. So Alison, I'd love to hear some specifics and logistics. So what does a time commitment, for example, look like?
Sure. The time commitment is not as much as you think. You hear all these wonderful stories about what these volunteers are doing, but it's such individualized attention that our volunteers usually only take on 1 to 2 cases at a time. So on average, it's only 5 to 7 hours per month. This is not a full-time job. In fact, you can do this if you have a full-time job. You heard Sharon say that she is a full-time lawyer. That's a really busy job, in case you don't know. But we have people from various walks of life, and they are able to work this in because it is not a big time commitment. As Dave said, it's kind of a SEAL Team 6 in the sense that we're on the front line. We are very specialized. As Sharon said, we are there for that kid or that sibling group. So it becomes not an overwhelming task for all of us. I'm going to steal from Joanne here. I've heard Joanne say several times that it's the old story of the child walking down the beach with the starfish. and he's picking one up and throwing them in and picking one up and throwing them in. And an adult, a somewhat jaded adult, as we all can be, walks up and says, "What are you doing? You can't save them all. There's a whole beach full of starfish." And the child picks one up and says, "But it matters to this one." So what our volunteers do is they pick up each one of those children, their starfish, and they say it matters to this one. And because we're focused on that one, it isn't a huge time commitment. It is 5 to 7 hours per month. There is training involved, which I will say does usually exceed the 5 to 7 hours per month as we get you started. There are 8 classes. The curriculum comes from our National CASA GAL Association and then is tailored locally to give you information about your local courts, your local services, things like that. The training amounts to 8 classes. It usually takes about 2 to 3 hours per class. There is a little bit of outside of class work. I hate to use the term homework because nobody likes that, but it's really based on adult learning. So we do give you all the training and the tools that you need to get through and to do everything. And as I think, as Patty said, and some others have said, you're not doing it on your own. There is staff, every county, that is there to support volunteers. As I said, that's my job. I'm a volunteer supervisor. I much consider it more to be a volunteer supporter. So anytime a volunteer needs help with a visit, or when we go to court together. I'm there to help with every step of the process, including court reports. So there is always help there as well. So you have training and support from beginning to end. And still, it seems to work in people's schedules because we are focusing on that one child or sibling loop, that one little starfish that we're making a difference for.
Great. Thanks, Allison. So Shayna, if we consider CASA the deep end of the pool. So maybe that's too much of a time commitment for someone. And they're just ready to take their first step. So how can they help in that capacity? Where would they start?
Yeah, I appreciate this question, Kelly. So, I think first to start out with, becoming involved with CASA is quite personalized. It's individualized work. You've heard a couple of different people explain their different levels and their different roles and how they became involved. So first, we encourage you just to give us a call. Let's have a conversation. You can, I'm sure you'll get our contact information put out in the chat here in a minute. And so let's just talk about available options in your area, your interests, your availability, concerns that you might have. And we can really have a discussion so that we can help connect you to those, to specifically what would help you to feel fulfilling and actually advocating for the children in your community. To the point about tangible options, right? How to actually get started. So all CASA programs, they have maybe a day of service, generally in conjunction with maybe their United Way. So you could volunteer with one specific day of service, or we are a nonprofit organization, so we host different kinds of events. Folks could come and help with event or sponsor an event. As I mentioned, we're all nonprofit organizations, so donations. We are fully reliant on the financial support, not just the volunteer support from our communities, but financial contributions. So some people are able to may not have time, but they have dollars. So a couple of bucks recurring really makes a difference. And then I think one other option to consider is to volunteer as a pair. So we have several programs that encourage volunteering with your spouse, or as a mother-daughter team, or as two friends, and so kind of sharing that load and having somebody who's also sworn in to confide in. So lots of different options, but ultimately the first step is just to contact us, contact your local program there, and get the conversation rolling.
I didn't know that you could volunteer as buddies. That is good to know. Good information. We are going to take another break, but I don't see any questions on the chat, so we're just going to plug away to the next question. I've heard it said before, unless you work in these systems, this certainly was the case for me when I started working with them a few years ago, or with this demographic of kids, you really don't know what they're going through or what their life experiences are like. What do you think our communities need to know about this demographic of kids? And we'll start with Joanne.
All right. I feel that as a CASA volunteer, and especially seeing that we have other people from the education field, that developing relationships with the school is vital. Children spend at least half of their awake time in the school system. So I always try to contact the school as soon as I get a child. And I find that the children, more often than not, are more open to talking when they're in a school, especially early in a placement, because they don't know if they can trust the foster parent, and they may not want the foster parent to hear some of what they're willing to say to me and to open up about. Another thing I found in the schools is that the teachers and school staff have often had previous experience with foster families. And I had a case where when I started, the school said, you need to really check out this foster home. And in the process of doing that, things were not as rosy as they may have wanted me to believe they were. So I was able to build these relationships within the school, and through the school social worker and the school secretary, we were actually able to find a kinship placement for this student where she thrived. Previously, she had been really inside of herself and not letting me in, not letting many people in. And that school relationship really made a difference. So in the community, you also have other organizations. You might have a child who is placed in institutional care for whatever reason, or you might have a child who is involved in a sports program or in some other types of activities where you can see their growth and their development and their interaction with peers. So I think those are all very important.
Thanks, Joan. Sharon?
Yeah, I would just like to add to that, that sometimes going into these different demographics, like we're talking about, can press your own personal limits, but in a good way, because they may be people and issues that you haven't confronted firsthand in your own life. And while I've never felt unsafe on a CASA assignment, if I ever thought I would feel safe, I'd call Alison or somebody else who would go with me. But it has pressed my personal boundaries at times. And I've learned some new things, and just realizing that, you know, when you go in there and you do the work that we do, it's rewarding not only because you affect the child, but because you affect the whole family. It's never just the child that has the issue. The child is connected to all these other people who have other issues, and sometimes they surprise you. Sometimes it's hugely inspiring to see the turnaround in people. And, you know, you should never forget that when you're working with a child, the impact on the family. I had one CASA family at the end of our time together, parting ways. She said, you know what? I want to do what you do. I want to be a CASA volunteer. How do I do that? I was like, what, you know, what better reward could there be than somebody seeing how much good CASA has done for their family and her life that she then wanted to give back. So.
Thank you, Sharon. Thanks for these stories. They're very inspirational. I'm going to have a good day today, I know, from hearing so many inspiring stories. Shana, now I'm going to ask you for some statistics. So we've heard it say that the attention of one caring adult can really make a difference in a child's life. Do you have any stats or stories you'd like to share to illustrate that?
Yeah, absolutely. A data nerd myself, so happy to share some of those. So, you know, last fiscal year, our CASA volunteers statewide, they helped over 880 children and youth achieve permanency. And so that's a really big number when you look at the number of kids in care. And so over 43% of that were children or youth. They were reunited with their mom and dad. 32% of those kids were adopted. So a majority moving towards reunification, which we like to see. But to serve all of the children who are coming into care, we are still desperately in need of more CASA volunteers, 701 to be exact. So right now there are roughly 1,700 children in the state's foster care system that don't have a community advocate. And we really want to help to close that gap. So I appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit about the data specs and really impress upon the need for our community volunteers to be able to connect with these children. And I think, Pat, you might have a story to kind of relate to the same idea.
Sure, of course. And I know that I just want to say that there are these inspiring stories, but there are also stories that are still very hurtful and still very scary. And I feel like I've taken on a lot of kids because I have the time to do that. So I think I get a bigger idea or a better idea of some of what our kids are going through. But specifically, I have a kid who came to us, a very, very young teen who came to us pregnant by a much older man. And so this particular case, the teenager was in DHHR custody. And when she gave birth to her child, that child was also in state custody. So it was really hard. We tried to do everything we could to give her the tools that she needed to in order to mother. Unfortunately, it did not work out. And the teen is still in custody, and it's very hard what she's going through. On the other hand, she was decided to give up her rights voluntarily. And now this year-old child is in a pre-adoptive home who's going to be adopted by that family. And initially, the teenager got moved to several different foster homes. So we're very worried about the baby having, like Dave was saying, like attachment issues and reactive attachment. Excuse me. But she's very stable. She's very well loved. And in doing so, CASA has been a part of changing that baby's life forever, and making sure that she had the support and the love that she needs to move forward into, her own life, which I think is very, very special. But I also, in talking about how we get support from CASA and stuff, I believe that behind every good advocate is a good advocate, and that is our volunteer supervisor. So however many people or kids that you decide to work with, you are definitely not on your own. And you've got your CASA family as well. I think that's pretty cool.
Thanks, Pat. To be sure, you all are walking down a path of some of the darkest times in these kids' lives. So it's great that they have you with them along the way. Alison, what are some of the challenges to recruiting CASA volunteers?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's just getting the word out. It is a unique volunteer opportunity. As I said, it doesn't take a huge time commitment, but there is a commitment of heart involved. And so finding the right volunteers and getting the word out is always difficult. So we appreciate so much Think Kids and opportunities like this to share what we do. And for everybody watching out there, we hope that this sounds like something you want to do. And if it's not, or if it is, we hope that you tell all your friends about CASA. And so maybe they want to do this. As Shannon said, we really want to fill that gap. I think the things with recruitment I hear a lot about is a lot of nerves. It's just nerves. It's what if I get too attached? And I tell people, good. We hope you get too attached. As you said, Kelly, one caring adult can change the lives we always say it changes the story for this child. So we want them to get attached. I get a question a lot, usually with people who have a little bit on the grayer hair side. Oh, what are your age limits? And I say, well, you have to be at least 21 years old. And then they go, well, what about upper? No, we have no upper age limits. So I try to put them at ease at that. I have people that are worried about where they're going to visit these children. Is there a safety issue? I have nerves about courts and court reports. And those kind of things is really where the volunteer supervisor really comes in. As Pat says, we are here as advocates for the advocates. And so we're here to help and support that. So I think a lot of it is calming nerves with recruitment, but most of it is just getting the word out. If you are interested, as Shanna said, you can contact us, the local programs, or Shanna at the state office. I'm sure Kelly will put up all our contact information. We do have a screening process. Obviously, you're working with youth who are very vulnerable. So we require things like background checks and CPS checks and a whole screening process. We do require the training. But mostly, I don't think that those are the things that really worry people. Mostly, we're just looking for the right people who have the heart to help children and make this work. You've heard everybody on here today has a little bit different background. We have a couple of retired educators who had some different jobs, therapists, an attorney. And it's important to remember we're not looking for anyone with a specialized background. As I said, we'll train you. So you don't need to be worried about that. I think it's really just a confidence and a nerve issue that we deal with. And I just want people out there to know that they can do it. I've had people say, I don't think I can write a court report. And I'm not a lawyer. We leave that to people like Sharon. And I assure them that don't worry about it. If you can play with a child and help a child and support a child, and you have opinions on what that child might need and what their best interest is, that's all we need. I can make anybody sound good in a court report. That's why court reports come through us. If you're worried about safety, you have your volunteer supervisor with you. As I said, I think a lot of it is just getting rid of those nerves. So we hope that this helps people see that it makes a huge difference in these children's lives, in these families' lives. We do get to see these wonderful reunifications, and adoptions and things like that. And so I hope people know that, yes, you can. For everybody listening, I may not know you personally, but I promise you, if you want to, you can.
Great. Thank you, Allison. It's worth a call or an email, right? So I put Shanna's information up on our YouTube site. We're we have about 7 minutes left. So I'm going to go to the last two questions. If there's one thing about volunteering for CASA that you volunteers who are on the panel would like folks to know, what is it? We'll start with Joanne.
I would like people to know that these visits don't have to only happen in the home. As I said earlier, I've been with CASA for 3 years. I have met in homes. I've been to schools. I've been in the parking lot at McDonald's. I've been to local parks. I've had restaurant lunches with the CPS worker and my child. I've made a trip to the ER because my child ended up in the ER. And when I pulled the curtain back, she said, "Oh, Joanne." I said, "It's okay. We're cool." I have walked along the creek, and my child would have preferred that I was in the creek, but she didn't tell me to bring boots. There's a lot of opportunity to see these children, not only in their foster environment, but in more natural and calming environments. And the big thing to remember in doing that is you can meet them somewhere, but you can't transport them there.
Great. Thank you, Joanne. Pat?
I just wanted to reiterate behind every good advocate is a good volunteer supervisor, and that you're never really alone. You get to choose the cases that you want. It's not like they're randomly assigned to you. You'll get sent a couple of cases by your supervisor, and you could say, I think this might be too triggering for me, or that might be my neighbor, or you know, this one may just have too many kids. So really you get to decide how and who you're working with, and working with your volunteer supervisor. They're going to make sure that you are your best and that you are doing your best for these particular kids. And it's amazing that the you get. It's really awesome.
Thanks, Pat. Dave?
I was not wanting to be involved in fundraising again. I've done a lot of that as an educator. I didn't want to be involved at policy level anymore. I wanted to be doing direct service. And when I started my training, I got to observe one of our advocates, Cecilia. Some of you may even remember her in court. She happened to be testifying that day. Cecilia wasn't even 5 foot tall. She looked just like Santa Claus's wife. And when she spoke, the whole courtroom stopped. Everything that she said was so important. The judge was focused on it, the prosecutor, the DHHR workers, the parents. What she was saying made all the difference in the world in what was happening that day in court. And I thought, boy, I'd like to do that. I'd like to do something that is that meaningful and is that important. And that's exactly what it's turned out to be. You have the authority of the judge behind you, and you have the expertise and the teamwork of CASA people working with you. And you can make it that point so that the important things that need to happen with the child can happen, and they oftentimes do happen.
Thanks, Dave. And before we wrap it on up with Shanna, does anyone have anything else perhaps we missed that you'd like to share? Okay, Shanna, if people want to get more involved, how can they do so?
Yep. So you all can, like we mentioned earlier, you can give us a call. I know Kelly dropped our phone number there in the chat. You can also go to our website. There's a pretty quick form. It shoots it straight to my email. Like other office folks, I sit in front of a computer, so it pings through in a pretty quick response. So you can shoot us an email. You can do our electronic form. We have 10 local CASA programs, but we have far more than that, actual offices around the state. So you can just stop into your local CASA office, knock on the door, and go in and have a conversation with them. Those addresses to get to the office in your or nearest you are on our website as well. So I think I'll point you there, www.wbcasa.org. It's wbcasa.org.
Thank you. Thank you, Shauna. Thank you, Pat, Patty, Dave, Allison, Joanne, and Sharon, and everyone who joined us today. We really appreciate all that West Virginia CASA does for West Virginia's kids. You have the information if you'd like to learn more about CASA. If you'd like to learn more about Think Kids, visit our website at thinkkidswv.org. And if you want to help get people more involved in CASA, you can share this video. It will be up on our YouTube site. And feel free to post any kind of questions or comments still in the comment section, and we'll make sure that you get your answer. Again, thanks to everyone who joined us. Have a great day and a great week, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. We appreciate the opportunity to chat with you all.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks.